I'm Ella, and here's how everything took a turn. It used to be just me, my little sister, Lily, Mom, and Dad. Life was ordinary, nothing flashy, but it was ours. Dad worked fixing cars, and Mom was a librarian until her friend Janet talked her into one of those personal growth workshops. It didn't take long for that to flip everything upside down. I remember the evening it all changed. We were sitting around the dinner table, a chorus of laughter and the clinking of dishes filling the room. Dad had just cracked a joke about his day at the shop when Mom dropped her news. "I'm quitting my job at the library," she announced, reaching for the mashed potatoes as if she hadn't just dropped a bombshell. Dad paused his fork halfway to his mouth. "Quit? Why the hell would you quit now, Karen?" Mom's eyes lit up with that scary kind of excitement. "I met some people at the seminar. They're into stock trading, real estate, all sorts of investments that could make us real money, not just pennies." "You're talking about gambling with our savings, Karen. That seminar is messing with your head," Dad snapped, his voice a mix of worry and anger. "It's not gambling, Tom. It's about taking risks to move forward. You're just too scared to see it," Mom fired back. That's how most dinners went after that seminar. Mom chasing dreams of big bucks and Dad trying to pull her back to reality. Their arguments got louder, rougher, and nothing like the parents I knew. One day, I came home from school to find Mom at the kitchen table, papers and her laptop spread out like she was plotting a takeover. "Hey, Mom, what's all this?" I asked, dropping my backpack. "It's my future, Elle. I'm done living paycheck to paycheck. It's time we live like the rich," she replied without looking up. "I've invested some money in a promising stock, and tomorrow I'm meeting with a group about a real estate venture. It's all going to change for us. You'll see." I wanted to believe her, really, but it felt like we were stepping onto a roller coaster without any safety harnesses. And what if it doesn't work out? What happens then? Mom finally looked up, her gaze fierce. "It will work out. I'm making sure of it." Days turned into weeks, and the tension didn't let up. Dad hated the gambling. He called it that, no matter what fancy name Mom gave it. I'd hear them at night, their voices raised in another heated debate. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for, Karen. Those schemes are nothing but money pits, and you're just too chicken to seize a real opportunity," Dad would say. "I'm trying to build something bigger here, and I don't need your negativity," Mom would retort. Arguments between Mom and Dad were daily events, each more heated than the last. The stakes kept getting higher, and so did the tension. It was like living on a ticking time bomb, waiting for it to blow. One Thursday night, the air in the kitchen was thick enough to cut with a knife. Dad had just discovered Mom pulled a hefty sum from their joint savings account. I was trying to focus on my homework at the dining table, but the rising voices made it impossible. "Karen, where's the money from our savings? It's nearly half gone." Dad's voice boomed from the doorway as he slapped some papers on the table. "I invested it, Tom. It's going into a fund that promises triple the return," Mom said, chopping vegetables without flinching. "We talked about this." "No, you talked, and I said no. When will you stop this madness?" Dad was red in the face, his hands balled into fists. "It's not madness, it's opportunity. You'd know if you weren't so stubbornly glued to your penny-pinching ways," Mom shot back, her voice icy. I looked over at Lily, who was quietly doodling in her notebook, her small shoulders hunched up to her ears. It broke my heart to see her like this, trying to shut out the storm around her. "Your opportunities are bleeding us dry, Karen. We can't even pay this month's bills on time because of your investments." Dad's voice cracked with frustration. "And we'll make up for it tenfold when the returns come in." "Just wait and see, Tom. Stop being such a pessimist," Mom retorted, slamming the knife down on the counter. Days passed, and the fights continued, each leaving a deeper mark than the last. I found myself dreading coming home after school, lingering at the library or wandering the streets just to avoid the constant tension. I was 2 years shy of graduation when the bomb dropped. It was a Saturday morning that seemed like any other until Dad found the bank statements. The air was thick with tension as he spread them across the kitchen table, his eyes scanning the numbers that made less sense with every glance. "What the hell is this, Karen?" Dad's voice was a mix of disbelief and rage as he looked up at Mom, who was sipping her coffee, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Tom, I was going to tell you," Mom began. "Tell me what? That you've gambled away Elle's college? Is that your big plan for financial freedom?" Dad threw the bank statement down, pointing at the glaring zero balance. "You've not just gambled with our money, Karen. You've gambled with our daughter's future." I was frozen by the entryway, Lily clutching my hand, both of us wide-eyed. This was worse than any argument before. This was about my life, my college, my escape plan from all this chaos. "This is it, Karen. I'm done. I can't do this anymore." Dad's voice was cold, resigned. Dad turned to me, his eyes filled with a sorrow that knotted my stomach. "I'm sorry, Ella. I tried." Within weeks, Dad was gone. He remarried quickly, moved to another city, and started over. He called at first, his voice always strained, always sorry. But Mom, ever the wounded warrior, blocked his number and painted him as the traitor. "Your father left us girls. He doesn't care. He's not even paying," Mom told us one evening, her tone bitter as she deleted his contact from my phone. With Dad gone and college now a distant dream, it was down to me to keep our ship from sinking. I picked up a job at the local diner, Benny's, a place where the coffee was bitter but the paycheck steady. Every cent I earned went straight to Mom, supposedly to help dig us out of the hole her gambling had buried us in. But despite handing over my pay, bills were piling up, and Mom was hardly ever home, always off chasing her next big score. One particularly long day had me coming home past midnight. The house was dark, Lily asleep on the sofa with books scattered around her. I gently woke her up to get her to bed, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow that she had to live like this. The next morning, still beat from the double shift, I found Mom at the kitchen table, scribbling in a notebook, filled with numbers and schemes, none of which ever seemed to pan out. "Mom, what's for dinner tonight? I'm pulling another double and I won't have time to cook," I asked, hoping for once she'd taken care of something, anything. She didn't look up, just kept on scribbling. "Don't eat here, eat at work, and you should get Lily a job there too. We could use the extra money." Her words hit me like a slap. "Are you serious? She's only 14, Mom, and my job is to make sure she doesn't have to work, that she gets to be a kid as long as she can." Mom shrugged, still not looking at me. "Needs must, Ella. We're drowning here." That evening, after my shift, I spotted Mom outside a flashy new casino downtown. She was arguing with a bouncer, her face flushed and angry as she was escorted out. "Mom," I called out, running over. "What are you doing?" She rounded on me, her eyes wild. "I was so close, Ella. I have a system. Downloaded it off the net. It's foolproof, Ella. I just need to tweak it a bit and then we'll be rolling in it. You think you're going to win big, but it's all a scam. It's designed to make you lose, Mom. The house always wins, not us," I pleaded. She scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, and you know better. Working at a diner is going to save us? At least it's real money, Mom. It's honest work, not this fantasy you're chasing." "You're addicted," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I'm not addicted. I'm trying to fix our lives. You'll see. Tomorrow I'll prove it," she stormed off, leaving me standing alone on the street. I walked home slowly, each step heavier than the last. I had to accept it. Mom wasn't going to change. It was up to me to keep Lily safe and try to scrape together some semblance of a future. But as I unlocked our front door to the sight of bills and final notices stacked up, I couldn't help but feel we were one losing hand away from losing everything. With Lily's birthday coming up, I threw myself into extra shifts at the diner. She had been upset lately, feeling left out because her clothes weren't as nice as her classmates. I wanted to buy her something special, something beautiful that would make her feel confident and happy on her day. I had a little box, a plain old shoebox, where I stashed away every extra dollar I could spare. I hid it well under my bed, buried beneath winter clothes and old notebooks. It was supposed to be a surprise, a good surprise, not like the ones Mom kept springing on us. 2 days before Lily's birthday, while I was at work, I got a frantic text from her. It just read, "Come home now, it's Mom." My stomach dropped. I swapped shifts with a friend and rushed home, my mind racing with what could have gone wrong this time. I arrived to shouting. The front door was open, and I could hear Mom's voice booming from inside my room. As I stepped in, the scene before me was chaos. Clothes and papers were strewn everywhere, and there was Mom holding the shoebox, her face twisted in anger. "You selfish little rat!" Mom was screaming as I walked in. "Stealing from your own family, hoarding money like it's all yours." "What? No, Mom, let me explain," I tried, but she cut me off. "Explain? Explain how you hide money while we're drowning in debt. You think you're better than me, that you can just do whatever you want? That money was for Lily, for her birthday," I shouted back, trying to make her understand, but it was like talking to a storm. Lily was crying by the doorway, her small frame shaking. "Mom, please. Ella was doing it for me, for my birthday." Mom turned on her, eyes blazing. "Oh, so you knew. Great. Both my daughters are conspiring against me. What a great family I have." "It's not like that, Mom. We just wanted—" Lily tried to speak, but Mom wasn't having any of it. "I can't trust either of you." Mom threw the box down, and the few bills fluttered to the floor. "Get out. If you're going to steal from me, then you can't stay here." So we packed, tears and silence filling the space between us. We grabbed what we could, clothes, a few books, anything that felt necessary as we stepped out. I looked back to see Mom drawing the curtain sharply, blocking us from view, her final gesture of shutting us out. Lily clutched her small bag tightly, her eyes large and worried in the dim streetlight. "Ella, we should call Dad," she murmured, her voice a mixture of hope and fear. I hesitated, the old bitterness and Mom's harsh words about Dad abandoning us echoing in my head. But desperation clawed up my chest, and the reality was we had nowhere else to go. "Okay," I said finally, pulling out my battered phone, scrolling through contacts I hadn't touched in years. Finding his number felt like unearthing a relic from another life. My thumb hovered over the call button, a lifeline so desperately needed, yet so heavy with past grievances. I pressed call before I could change my mind. The line clicked, and then his voice, warm and unfamiliar, filled my ear. "Hello, Dad, it's Ella and Lily. We need help," I blurted out, the words tumbling in a rush. "Mom, she kicked us out. We have nowhere to go." There was a pause, heavy and thick. Then softly but firmly, he said, "I'm sending you money for train tickets right now. Come to me. We'll figure this out together." True to his word, the money came through minutes later. We booked tickets for the next train to where Dad lived, a city that felt worlds away from our troubles, but in reality was just a few hours by rail. The train ride was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. Upon arriving, the sight of Dad waiting at the station, his face lined with concern, was almost too much. He looked the same, yet so different. Beside him stood his new wife, Claire, her smile warm but cautious. "Dad," I managed, my voice thick as he pulled us into a tight hug. "Let's get you girls home," he said, leading us to his car. At the house, a modest but welcoming place, we sat down in the living room, the air filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Dad's wife excused herself, leaving us to talk. It was then, in the soft light of the living room, that we poured out everything, the fights, the schemes, the eviction. Dad listened, his expression growing darker with each word. When we finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out, taking both my hands in his. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice heavy with guilt. "I've been sending money for alimony and your education every month. I had no idea that you were going through all this." Lily and I exchanged glances, the pieces clicking into place. The missing money, the lies. It was too much to take in all at once. "I'm sorry," Dad continued, his eyes moist. "I should have seen through it. I should have been there." "It's not your fault, Dad," I said, feeling the weight lift slightly with each word spoken. "We're here now. That's what matters." Dad nodded, squeezing my hands. "You're right, and I'll make it right, Ella. We'll get you enrolled in college. And Lily, there's a great school just a few blocks from here. You'll like it, I promise." The relief was palpable, both of us letting out breaths we hadn't realized we'd been holding. Lily leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Dad in a fierce hug. I joined in, and for a moment, the world didn't seem so cold and harsh. The next morning, gathered around the breakfast table in Dad's kitchen. The sunlight spilled over like a promise. Claire, who I learned was a lawyer, brewed coffee while chatting about the local school system. Her voice smooth and reassuring. "So, you girls will be needing some guidance," Claire began, pouring herself a cup. "Your fathers told me everything, and I want you to know I'm here to help. Legally, personally, whatever you need." Lily, munching on her toast, looked up with a hopeful glance. "Does that mean you can stop Mom?" Her voice trailed off, but the question hung in the air, heavy and fraught with past pains. Claire sat down her coffee, her expression serious yet kind. "Yes, Lily, I'm going to make sure she can't pull you back into that mess. We're filing for full custody and ensuring the alimony will no longer fall into unreliable hands." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, plans for the school year, and my college prep. I had started reading again, dusting off old textbooks, and filling my head with knowledge that had nothing to do with survival. It felt strange, yet exhilarating. Lily got enrolled in a nearby school and with Claire's help started anew, with fresh new clothes that made her beam with confidence each morning. 3 months after our world turned upside down, while I was deep in a study session, my phone rang. Seeing Mom's number flat on the screen churned my stomach. "Ella," Mom's voice was shrill, frantic. "They took her from me, Ella. They say I can't be Lily's mother anymore, and they want the alimony back, the money they claim I stole." Her words, once capable of manipulating my emotions, now fell flat, filtered through the clarity of distance and truth. Mom, you did take that money that was meant for us, for our future. You used us. Mom's voice turned harsh, venomous. Ungrateful girl, you come back here and work, pay off these debts. It's the least you owe me. I felt the old pull, the trained instinct to soothe, to placate, but I wasn't that person anymore. No, Mom, I don't owe you anything, I said firmly, cutting through the tension that had lingered for too long. Dad's been paying you for years, and you lied to us, to everyone. I'm done. I hung up before she could respond, before I could hear the sobbing or the anger that might pull me back in. Turning off my phone, I sat for a moment in the quiet of Dad's study, the weight of the call sinking in. I'd stood up for myself, for Lily. It was a new feeling, scary but empowering. Then I turned back to my books, the pages less daunting now. I was building something new, something mine. The past would always be a part of me, but it would not define my future, not anymore. As Dad had promised, he supported me through college, covering tuition so I could focus on my studies without the crushing weight of debt. Yet, despite the financial safety net he provided, old habits die hard. I couldn't shake off a need to support myself. I picked up a part-time job at a local cafe, balancing work with my courses. It felt good, earning my keep, keeping busy. Claire, Dad's wife, turned out to be more than just a steely lawyer. She became the family anchor we didn't know we were missing. For Lily, she was there at every school event, clapping louder than anyone. For me, she showed up at my college, attending every significant ceremony. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I couldn't help but express my gratitude. Claire, I don't know how to thank you. You've been there for every parent-teacher meeting, every recital. It means the world to us. It's no big deal, Ella, Claire smiled, passing me the salad. You girls are my family now. I'm just doing what any parent would do. The years rolled on. Each semester brought a new challenge, but also a new opportunity to prove how far I'd come. By my final year, I'd managed to earn a scholarship covering my tuition fully. Yet, I kept the job at the cafe, not just for the money, but for the sense of normalcy it gave me. Graduation day arrived quicker than I had anticipated, I reminisced. As I stood there, cap and gown fluttering slightly in the spring breeze, I saw them, Dad, Claire, and Lily, their faces alight with pride and joy. Walking across that stage, I wasn't just receiving a diploma. I was stepping into a new chapter, one I had written for myself against odds that once seemed insurmountable. With a degree in hand and a job lined up, I moved into a small apartment in the city. It was modest but mine. Claire helped me move in, fussing over the placement of furniture and decorations. This is a fresh start, Ella. Make it yours, she advised as we arranged the last of the books on a new shelf. I plan to, Claire. Really make it something special. Life settled into a new rhythm after college, with my days filled with the constant motion of working at a courier company. The job was demanding but rewarding, and I appreciated the stability and decent paycheck it offered. One afternoon, as I was finishing up my rounds, my phone rang. The familiar number that flashed on the screen made my heart sink. Mom. Taking a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself for what was coming. Ella, I need your help. Mom's voice was urgent, tinged with desperation. What's going on? I asked, though part of me already guessed the answer. I've lost the house, Ella. The bank took it because I couldn't keep up with the payments. I'm on the streets now, she confessed, her voice breaking. The news hit hard, even though part of me had been waiting for the other shoe to drop for years. Mom, I'm sorry to hear that, but I just need some money to get back on my feet to cover my debts. You can help me, can't you? Her voice was pleading now, the familiar cadence of manipulation threading through her words. I can help you get treatment for your gambling. That's what you need, not more money to chase your losses, I responded firmly. Her response was immediate and visceral, laced with anger. You ungrateful brat. After all I'd done for you, you'd let your own mother live on the streets? That's not fair, Mom, and you know it. I'm offering real help. Please take it. My voice was firm, the years of being manipulated hardening me to her guilt trips. She cursed, then, pouring through the line, every word sharper than the last. I held the phone away from my ear, her furious, dark reminder of why we drifted so far apart. Finally, I spoke, my own voice calm but resolute. I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom. I hope one day you'll get the help you need. With that, I hung up and did something I should have done years ago. I blocked her number. The rest of the day passed in a blur. By the time I met up with Lily at our usual coffee spot, my thoughts were a tangled mess. Lily noticed immediately. Hey, what's wrong? Her concern was evident as she reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. It's Mom, I began, and poured out the entire conversation. Her demands, her fury, and my decision to finally cut ties. Lily was quiet for a long moment after I finished, her expression thoughtful. Then she squeezed my hand gently. You did the right thing, Ella. It's hard, but it's right. She's not the person we once loved. She's made her choices. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. It hurts, Lil. It feels like I'm abandoning her, but I know she's abandoned herself a long time ago, I confessed, the weight of realization heavy on my shoulders. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that save us, Lily said softly, her wisdom beyond her years evident in her eyes and her words. You're choosing not to drown with her. We have our own lives to live, she continued, her words settling something deep within me. I was tired of the cycle of hope and disappointment that came with every call from Mom. It was time to break free, to truly start anew. As we left the coffee shop, the evening air felt fresher, lighter, as if an affirmation of my decision. I knew the road wouldn't always be smooth, but I was ready to face it head on, to build, dream, and believe in the best of what was yet to come.
Hello, my name is Mia Bennett, and I'm here to share a story that's been a big part of my life for the past few years. It's a tale of family expectations, personal rebellion, and finding my own path. To start, I want you to understand who I am and the life I used to lead. I'm 22 now, but it feels like I've been wrestling with my family's expectations for as long as I can remember. My twin sister, Lily, and I were always compared to each other. While Lily was effortlessly excelling in everything she did, whether it was acing her business management courses or being the perfect daughter, my life seemed to be a constant struggle to keep up. Our parents, Dr. Thomas Bennett and Helen Bennett, were the epitome of high expectations. Dad was a respected university professor, known for his stern demeanor and intense focus on his academic career. Mom, on the other hand, was a traditional housewife, deeply invested in keeping up the family's impeccable image. They had a vision for our lives, and it didn't quite match up with who I was or who I wanted to be. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was under a microscope. Dad would often mention how proud he was of Lily and her academic achievements. Mom would tell me how important it was for me to follow Lily's example if I wanted to make them proud. To them, success meant excelling academically, securing a prestigious job, and marrying someone they deemed suitable. For a long time, I tried to fit into this mold. I wore what they approved of, followed their rules, and did my best to be the daughter they wanted. But something inside me was screaming to break free. I wanted to be more than just a shadow of Lily. I wanted to make choices based on my own desires, not just what would satisfy my parents. It wasn't that I didn't love them, it was just that their expectations felt like a heavy weight around my neck. One small act of rebellion was my way of expressing this struggle. Instead of the conventional clothing they preferred, I started wearing bold eyeliner and unconventional outfits. It felt like a tiny, defiant stand against the constraints they had imposed on me. At first, these little changes were met with raised eyebrows and disapproval. But for me, they were a sign that I was inching closer to finding my own identity. The turning point in my story came when I met Ethan. I was in the university library, struggling through another assignment, when he walked in. Ethan was a carpenter in his early 30s, and he was nothing like anyone I had ever met before. He had a way of making the mundane seem exciting, of seeing the world through a lens of freedom and possibility. When he spoke about his work and life, it was clear that he lived on his own terms. Ethan had this infectious enthusiasm for life that I couldn't ignore. He wasn't confined by societal expectations or the rigid plans that my parents had laid out for me. We started talking more, and it wasn't long before I realized how much I enjoyed being around him. He made me feel like I could be myself without any pretenses or fears of judgment. One evening, as we were sitting in a cozy cafe near the university, Ethan took my hand and looked into my eyes. "Mia," he said softly, "I know it sounds crazy, but I can see a future for us. One where we're both free to be who we really are." I felt a rush of emotions. It was the first time someone had spoken to me so openly about a future that wasn't dictated by someone else's expectations. Ethan's proposal wasn't just about marriage. It was an invitation to a different way of living. It was about breaking free from the mold that had been cast for me and carving out a new path together. When Ethan proposed, I knew that my parents would never approve. They had always envisioned me with someone who fit their idea of success, a person who would align with their standards and social expectations. But Ethan was everything they disapproved of. He lived a life of spontaneity and freedom, far removed from the academic and social circles they valued. Despite knowing the challenges ahead, I said yes to Ethan. For the first time, I was choosing to live for myself. It was a huge step, one that would eventually lead to me making some of the hardest decisions of my life. As I prepared to introduce Ethan to my parents, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending conflict. I hoped they might see how happy he made me and understand why I was drawn to him. But deep down, I feared their reaction. That's where my story begins, caught between the life my parents had planned for me and the life I was beginning to build with Ethan. I was ready to face the consequences, no matter how daunting they seemed. Introducing Ethan to my parents was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. My heart pounded as I led him into the house, hoping against hope that my parents might accept him and see the happiness he brought me. Dad was sitting in his study, surrounded by piles of books and papers. He barely looked up when we entered, his attention focused on his work. Mom was in the kitchen, busy preparing dinner. Her movements were precise, her face set in the kind of expression that signaled she was deep in thought. "Mia, there you are," she said, turning as we walked in. Her gaze shifted to Ethan, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "And who is this?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, this is Ethan. He's a carpenter and, well, he's someone very important to me." Dad looked up from his papers, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "A carpenter?" he repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. "And what brings him into our home?" Mom's expression hardened as she glanced at Ethan, taking in his casual attire and easy demeanor. "So, Ethan, tell us about yourself," she said, her tone polite but distant. Ethan, ever the charismatic person, smiled warmly. I'm a carpenter, like Mia said. I love what I do, and I've always believed in living life on my own terms. I know it might seem unconventional, but I think it's important to be true to yourself. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, and Dad's gaze grew even more scrutinizing. It was clear they weren't impressed, and the tension in the room was palpable. We sat down for dinner, the conversation strained and stilted. I tried to steer the discussion towards lighter topics, hoping to ease the tension, but every attempt felt like it was met with cold indifference. Dad kept glancing at Ethan as if trying to find a flaw in his character, while Mom seemed to be rehearsing a speech in her head. After dinner, I knew we were approaching the inevitable confrontation. As we were saying our goodbyes, Dad cleared his throat and said, "Mia, could you and Ethan come with me to the study for a moment?" My stomach nodded as we followed him into his study. He shut the door behind us, his expression stern. "Mia, I need to be honest with you," he began. "We've always had certain expectations for you and your sister. It's important for our family's reputation and future." I swallowed hard. "I understand, Dad, but Ethan makes me happy. Isn't that worth something?" Dad's face grew more serious. "It's not just about happiness, Mia. It's about making choices that align with the family's values and future. Ethan, while he may be a good person, doesn't fit into that picture." Mom nodded in agreement, her eyes fixed on me. "We've been very clear about what we expect from you. If you choose to be with Ethan, you need to understand that it means going against everything we've worked for and what we believe is best for you." Ethan's gaze met mine, filled with concern. "Mia, what are they saying?" Dad took a deep breath and delivered the ultimatum. "You have a choice, Mia. Either you stay with us and follow the path we've laid out for you, which includes breaking off this relationship, or you choose Ethan and leave this family behind. It's a difficult decision, but one you need to make." The weight of their words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had always known this moment might come, but facing it was an entirely different experience. My heart raced as I tried to process their ultimatum. Ethan's hand found mine, offering comfort and solidarity. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you," he said quietly. "But I hope you'll choose what makes you truly happy." The finality of their words and Ethan's unwavering support left me in turmoil. I had spent my entire life trying to meet my parents' expectations, but now I was being asked to choose between my own happiness and their approval. It was a choice no one should have to make, but it was the reality I faced. As we left the study, I knew the decision ahead of me was monumental. It wasn't just about Ethan or my parents. It was about my own future and what I truly wanted from life. The tension and uncertainty hung in the air, and the path forward seemed both daunting and exhilarating. The hours that followed were filled with sleepless nights and endless contemplation. I knew I had to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. It was clear that whatever decision I made, it would come with its own set of challenges and sacrifices. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope and determination to live a life true to myself. The days following the ultimatum were some of the hardest of my life. Every conversation with my parents felt like a battle, each word exchanged laced with underlying tension. I knew that choosing Ethan meant breaking away from the only life I had ever known, but the more I thought about it, the clearer my path became. Ethan and I spent long hours talking about our future, discussing everything from the small details of daily life to our dreams and fears. His unwavering support made me feel less alone in this tumultuous time. He was my rock, the person who made me feel like I was finally living for myself rather than trying to meet someone else's expectations. One evening, as we sat together in the cozy little apartment Ethan had rented, he took my hands in his. "Mia, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. I know this isn't easy, but I believe in us." His words were a balm for my troubled heart. I just don't know how to tell them. I admitted, my voice breaking. I know it'll hurt them, but I can't keep living under their shadow. Ethan squeezed my hands gently. It's not about hurting them. It's about choosing your happiness. You deserve to live a life that feels right to you. The decision was made. I could no longer live a life defined by my parents' expectations. I was ready to embrace a future with Ethan, even if it meant walking away from my family. That weekend, I made the difficult choice to have one final conversation with my parents. I wanted to do it face to face, to let them see my resolve and hear my reasons for choosing Ethan. My heart raced as I walked into the family home, my stomach tied in knots. Mom and Dad were seated in the living room, their expressions a mix of concern and anticipation. I took a deep breath and began. I've made my decision. I'm choosing Ethan. I can't continue living a life that isn't true to who I am. Dad's face turned ashen, and Mom's eyes filled with tears. Mia, you're throwing away everything we've worked for, Dad said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Don't you see the impact this will have? I shook my head, my voice firm. I see the impact, Dad. But I have to live my own life, not the one you've planned for me. Ethan makes me happy in a way that I've never felt before. I can't ignore that. Mom's tears flowed freely now, her voice trembling. We just want what's best for you. We thought we were guiding you towards a successful and fulfilling life. I looked at them, my heart aching. I understand that, but your vision of what's best for me is not the same as what I need for myself. I love you both, but I have to follow my own path. The conversation ended in a heavy silence. My parents, deeply hurt and disappointed, struggled to understand my decision. It was clear that they were not ready to accept my choice. The finality of our conversation hit me hard. I knew that by choosing Ethan, I was closing a chapter of my life with my parents. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but it was a necessary step towards my own happiness. Ethan and I moved forward with our plans, but the beginning wasn't easy. We had to navigate the challenges of starting over, from finding a place to live to adjusting to our new life together. Despite the difficulties, there was a sense of freedom and fulfillment that came with our choice. We married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by Ethan's friends and family. It was a far cry from the grand affair my parents might have envisioned, but it was perfect in its simplicity. I felt a deep sense of contentment as we exchanged our vows, knowing that I was making a choice that was truly my own. The months that followed were filled with adjustments and new experiences. Ethan's carpentry business began to thrive, and he completed advanced training that significantly increased his income. We bought a modest house on the outskirts of Chicago, and I started working as a coordinator for his business. Despite the joy and love in our lives, a part of me still felt the absence of my parents. I held on to the hope that they might eventually come around, but their silence was a constant reminder of the price I had paid for my freedom. Then, the unexpected happened. My parents came to me, not as I had hoped, but in a state of desperation. They had been caught up in a scandal involving Dad at the university, and they had been disowned by Lily and her husband. They were reaching out, hoping for help from the one person they had hurt. As they stood in front of me, their faces drawn and weary, I faced an emotional storm. They had come seeking refuge, but the hurt and betrayal I felt were still fresh. I listened to their plea, my heart torn between the past and the present. In that moment, I realized that despite their need, I had already made my choice. The life I had built with Ethan was a testament to my own happiness and independence. I couldn't go back to the life they had tried to dictate, no matter how much they now needed me. I'm sorry, but I can't help you, I said, my voice steady but full of sorrow. I've made a new life for myself, and I need to protect that. I can't undo the choices I've made or go back to the way things were. Their shocked and hurt expressions were the final break in our relationship. It was clear that our family ties had been irrevocably severed, and the path I had chosen was now firmly in place. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a profound sense of finality. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with both the pain of loss and the satisfaction of living a life true to myself. With Ethan by my side, I knew I had made the right choice, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. Life with Ethan was a journey full of ups and downs, but it was a journey I was grateful to be on. We settled into our new home on the outskirts of Chicago, finding comfort in the cozy space that we could finally call our own. The house wasn't big or fancy, but it was ours. We filled it with laughter, love, and the small touches that made it uniquely ours. My role as a coordinator in Ethan's business kept me busy, and it was rewarding to see our joint efforts paying off. Ethan's carpentry skills continued to shine, and his new certification brought in a significant increase in income. He was earning around $80,000 a year now, which allowed us to build a comfortable life. We even started talking about our future more seriously, imagining a life filled with new possibilities. One evening, as we were winding down from a long day, Ethan took my hand and looked into my eyes with a warmth that always made me feel cherished. "You know, Mia," he said softly, "I've been thinking about how lucky we are. Despite everything, we've managed to create something wonderful together." I smiled, feeling a sense of contentment wash over me. I know. I never imagined things would turn out this way, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Our happiness grew even more when we discovered that we were expecting a baby. The news was a joyful surprise, and it felt like a new chapter was beginning. We eagerly prepared for the arrival of our son, setting up a nursery and dreaming about the future we would build for him. However, life took another dramatic turn when my parents, once again seeking help, reappeared in our lives. The scandal that had previously rocked their world had left them isolated, and they had been disowned by Lily and her husband. They came to me, vulnerable and desperate, asking for assistance. Seeing them again stirred up a whirlwind of emotions. My heart ached for the family I had once been a part of, but I also knew that their actions had irreparably changed our relationship. I was now deeply rooted in the life Ethan and I had built together, and I had to protect that. After hearing their plea, I took a deep breath and made my decision. "I'm sorry, but I can't take you in. I've worked hard to build a new life, and I have to focus on that now." Their disappointment was palpable, but I stood firm in my decision. The finality of it all was sobering. I realized that I had already made the choice to prioritize my own happiness and the family I had created with Ethan. As time went on, Ethan and I welcomed our son into the world. Holding him for the first time was a profound moment, filled with love and hope. He represented the future we had dreamed of, a new beginning that brought immense joy into our lives. Despite the absence of my parents, I found peace in the life I had chosen. The journey had been difficult, but it had led me to a place where I could truly be myself. Ethan and I were building a life grounded in love and authenticity, and it was more fulfilling than I had ever imagined. The story of my life had come full circle. I had faced the struggle between individuality and conformity, and I had chosen to embrace my own path. With Ethan by my side and our son in my arms, I knew that I had found my place. The ties to my past were gone, but the future was bright with the promise of happiness and fulfillment. And as I looked at my little family, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The choices I had made, though challenging, had led me to a life that was truly mine. The journey was far from over, but it was one I was eager to continue, with love and hope guiding the way.
My name is Ashley, and I was born into a seemingly ideal household. My father earned a respectable wage as an engineer at a nearby firm. Mother remained home and cleaned the house. Laughter and affection abounded. They were pleasant in the early years. When my dad first saw me when he got home from work, his face lit up. He would remark, "There's my little princess," and he would grab me tightly in his arms. As she watched us from the kitchen doorway, Mom would grin. However, life has a habit of surprising you with unexpected turns of events. It all changed when I was 7 years old. It began on a typical Tuesday. Dad was pale and sweating when he arrived home from work. He flopped onto the couch and rubbed his chest while I stood on the stairs. Mom said, "Maybe you should see a doctor." Dad gave a shake of his head. "No, it won't last." "Sarah, don't worry." Dad abruptly fell from his chair and gripped his chest when we went down to supper that evening. Mom ran to his side, screaming. She screamed, her voice hoarse with fright, "Ashley, call 911." I phoned the number and told the operator what had occurred, hands trembling. It seemed like an endless wait for the ambulance to arrive. The hospital visits and quiet talks that followed were a haze. Words like permanent damage and heart attack were thrown around, and I wasn't sure what they meant. Dad had changed by the time he returned home. He was no longer able to work in the factory and took a new job in an office, which paid much less. That's when the altercation began. "Sarah, we can't afford this." Dad would yell while flinging cash about. "So what am I supposed to do about it?" Mom would lash out. "You should do that. I'm not going to work on it." I used to hide in my room and attempt to muffle their irate sounds by covering my ears with a pillow. I heard Mom talking to Dad's folks on the phone one evening. "You must assist us," she said. "We're having trouble here." However, Grandpa and Grandma would have none of it. Grandma's voice crackled across the speaker as she remarked, "You've got insurance money, Sarah. It's about time you started working too. John can't possibly accomplish everything right now." Mom muttered something beneath her breath and slammed the phone. And that's when the conflicts grew worse. Dad insisted we didn't have the money, but Mom continued asking for more. Dad looked thinner and more exhausted every day, and I watched helplessly. Dad suffered another heart attack 3 years after the first. He didn't make it this time. My father passed away when I was 10 years old. After Dad's burial, everything quickly shifted. I heard my mother and my grandparents arguing angrily, with words flying like daggers. "You're hoarding all the stuff for yourself," Granny charged, her voice quivering with rage. "How about Ashley?" John wished for someone to look after her. Mom said icily, "I'm her mother. I'll make the best decision for her." At the time, I had no idea why they were arguing. To me, phrases like embezzlement, money, and inheritance were simply huge words. All I knew was that Mom appeared to be tougher somehow different. Before I could process it all, Mom gave me another shocking revelation. One day, while she was putting on lipstick, she said, "Ashley, I'm getting married again," without even looking at me. The nuptials were a haze. Mom seemed content, but I was confused. Tom, her new spouse, hardly acknowledged my presence. I quickly realized that I was not a part of their plans. My mother sat me down one morning. "Ashley, you will be spending some time with Grandma and Grandpa." "But why?" I questioned, trying not to cry. "Tom and I require some alone time," she stated in a tone that excluded any possibility of disagreement. I was sent to live with my grandparents without warning. It was much larger and more opulent than our previous house. Kind and kind, Grandma and Grandpa always made sure I had all I needed. But I missed Mom very much, even with their affection. A few months went by. I became accustomed to spending time with my grandparents and found solace in their constant presence. But I secretly wished Mom would return to get me. Then she did, without warning. "Ashley, get in your suitcase." Mom stated, "You're coming home," during one of her infrequent visits. My heart leaped. She wanted me back. She missed me. As I bid Grandma and Grandpa farewell, I promised to pay them frequent visits. Still, my happiness was fleeting. Upon arriving home, I understood why Mom had truly brought me back. With a Wrigley bundle in her palm, she exclaimed, "This is your baby brother, Jake. You'll be assisting me in caring for him." The harsh reality set in. I was called back to serve as a nanny, not because Mom missed me. School, housework, and babysitting took up my days as Mom went out with Tom or spent time with her friends. It fell to me to watch Jake. Schoolwork slipped from people's minds. There was little time for studying between changing diapers and tidying the house. One evening, as I struggled to calm a kicky Jake while trying to finish a book report, Tom came home early. "Where's your mother?" he asked, frowning at the mess in the living room. "She went out with her friends," I mumbled, bouncing Jake on my hip. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll take him. You try to clean up a bit." As I picked up toys and wiped down surfaces, I couldn't help but wonder, was this what family was supposed to be like? An absent mother, a distant stepfather, and a child forced to grow up too fast. My life as a makeshift nanny took its toll. I was exhausted all the time, falling asleep in class and forgetting assignments. It didn't take long for my teachers to notice. One day, Mrs. Thompson, my English teacher, pulled me aside after class. "Ashley, is everything okay at home?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. I mumbled something about being tired, but Mrs. Thompson wasn't buying it. A week later, I found out she called Grandma, and Grandma, in turn, called Mom. After a heated argument, Mom slammed the phone down and turned to me. "Pack your bags," she said coldly. "You're going back to your grandparents." I was torn between relief and hurt. Part of me was glad to escape the endless chores and babysitting, but another part felt rejected all over again. Life at Grandma and Grandpa's was like before, stable, loving, and focused on my well-being. My grades started to improve, and I felt like a kid again. Months passed with barely a word from Mom. Then out of the blue, Grandma got another call. Sarah's divorced Tom, Grandma told me later, her voice a mix of surprise and disappointment. "He's taken Jake and moved to another city." I felt a pang of sadness for my little brother, but also a strange sense of relief. At least he was with his dad, who seemed to care more than Mom ever did. That's when Mom discovered social media. Suddenly, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Mom was posting constantly, selfies at clubs, pictures of fancy meals, and lots of photos with a guy who looked barely older than 18. But it wasn't just new boyfriends. Mom was experimenting. Soon her post took a different turn. "Just got my new girls," read one post, accompanied by a photo of Mom in a tight top, her chest suddenly much larger than I remembered. The surgeries didn't stop there. Every few months, there'd be a new post about another procedure. Bigger hips, plumper lips, even her eyes looked different. I watched from afar as Mom transformed herself post by post, surgery by surgery. The woman in the photos looked nothing like the mother I remembered. It was like watching a stranger play dress up with my mom's life. Through all of this, Mom never once asked about me. No calls on my birthday, no messages asking how school was going, nothing. At first, it hurt. I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't enough for her. But as time passed, the pain dulled. I stopped expecting her calls, stopped hoping she'd suddenly remember she had a daughter. The years flew by faster than I could have imagined. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage in my cap and gown, accepting my high school diploma. Grandma and Grandpa cheered louder than anyone else in the audience. Mom wasn't there, but I'd stopped expecting her to show up long ago. Thanks to my grandparents' generosity, I headed off to college that fall. They insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests. "Your education is the best investment we could make," Grandma said firmly. "Just focus on your studies." And I did. College was challenging, exciting, and everything I'd hoped for. I made new friends, discovered my passion for marketing, and for the first time in my life, felt like I was truly becoming my own person. 4 years later, I graduated with honors and landed a job at a local advertising firm. The day I got my first paycheck, I knew what I had to do. "I'm moving out," I told Grandma and Grandpa over dinner. "I found an apartment I can afford." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "Are you sure, Ashley?" Grandma asked. "You know you're always welcome here." "I'm sure," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. But I'll visit all the time, I promise." Life settled into a new rhythm. Work was challenging but rewarding, and I was slowly building a life for myself. But as I was flourishing, my grandparents were fading. It started with little things. Grandpa forgetting where he put his glasses. Grandma getting tired more easily. Then came the doctor's appointments, the concerned looks, the hushed phone calls. I spent every free moment with them, trying to repay a fraction of the love and care they'd given me. Weekends were filled with quiet afternoons, watching old movies, or just sitting and talking. One chilly autumn morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. Grandpa had passed away in his sleep. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and tearful relatives. Through it all, Grandma was a pillar of strength, but I could see the light had gone out of her eyes. Grandma didn't last long after Grandpa died. It was like she'd lost her will to go on without him. 3 months later, I was planning another funeral. As I was going through Grandma's address book, I found Mom's number and, against my better judgment, sent a text. "Grandma's funeral is tomorrow. It would mean a lot if you came." The reply came hours later. "Sorry, can't make it." Those people were practically strangers to me anyway. Those people, my grandparents, the ones who'd raised me, loved me, supported me, strangers to her. I deleted her number right then and there. After the funeral, the lawyer called me in to read the will. I sat in his office, feeling numb as he explained that Grandma and Grandpa had left me everything. Their house, their savings, all of it. "It's a considerable sum," the lawyer said gently. "They wanted to make sure you were taken care of." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Even in death, they were still looking out for me. As I left the lawyer's office, clutching the paperwork, I felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. I'd lost the 2 people who'd been my rock for so long, but their final gift meant I'd never have to worry about financial security again. The task of sorting through my grandparents' belongings was both emotionally draining and strangely cathartic. Each object held a memory, a piece of the life we'd shared. I worked my way through the house, room by room, until I reached Grandpa's study. His desk was a treasure trove of old documents, each neatly filed away. As I sifted through them, a yellowed envelope caught my eye. My heart skipped a beat when I saw my father's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was Dad's will, dated just before he died. As I read, my vision blurred with tears. "To my dear Sarah," it read, "I leave the bulk of our savings, but I ask that a portion be set aside for Ashley's college education. Our daughter's future is important, and I want to ensure she has the best opportunities possible." The paper crumpled in my fist as a wave of anger washed over me. Mom had known all along. She'd had money specifically meant for my education, money Dad had wanted me to have, and she kept it all for herself. Suddenly, all those arguments I'd overheard as a child made sense. Grandma and Grandpa accusing Mom of embezzlement, of taking everything for herself. They'd been right. For a moment, I considered calling Mom, demanding an explanation. But what good would it do? She'd made her choices long ago. I decided then and there to let it go. I had a good life, a bright future ahead of me. I didn't need to dredge up old hurts. Little did I know, the past wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, as I was leaving work, my phone rang. I almost dropped it when I saw the caller ID. Mom. Hello, I answered, my voice uncertain. Ashley, it's your mother. I waited, not sure what to say. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she continued, her voice sounding different than I remembered. I miss you, sweetheart. I want us to try and fix things between us. Can we meet? I was speechless. After years of silence, this was the last thing I expected. Okay, I said finally. Let's meet. We agreed on a cafe near my office for the following Saturday. When I walked into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman waving at me from a corner table looked nothing like the mother I remembered. Her face was taut and unnaturally smooth, her lips plump, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Years of surgeries had transformed her into someone I might have passed on the street without a second glance. We ordered coffee, and for a while, we made awkward small talk. She asked about my job, and I asked about her life. It felt surreal, like I was having lunch with a stranger who happened to know details about my childhood. Finally, she reached across the table and took my hand. Ashley, I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. I haven't been a good mother to you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After your father died, I was lost. I made a lot of mistakes. I pushed you away when I should have held you close. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at this woman, this stranger with my mother's eyes, and felt a complex swirl of emotion. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand explanations for years of neglect, for the money she'd kept for me. But another part, a part I thought had died long ago, just wanted my mom back. I don't know, I said honestly. It's been a long time, Mom. A lot has happened. She nodded, looking down at her coffee. I understand, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I've missed so much of your life. I want to be part of it again, if you'll have me. The next few weeks were surreal. Mom and I met for coffee, went shopping, and even had dinner together a couple of times. It felt strange, like trying on an old sweater that didn't quite fit anymore, but I was cautiously optimistic. One afternoon, as we were finishing up lunch, Mom casually asked, "So, sweetie, did your grandparents leave you anything?" The question caught me off guard. Yeah, I replied hesitantly. They left me their house and some savings. Mom's eyes lit up in a way that made me uneasy. Oh, that's wonderful. You know, I've been meaning to ask you a favor. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I'm getting married again to Daniel. You remember him, right? He's 16 years younger than me. We want to have a bachelorette party, and I was wondering if we could use your grandparents' house. It's such a lovely place for a celebration. I blinked, trying to process this information. You're getting married again. She waved her hand dismissively. Third's the charm, right? So, about the house. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Sure, I guess that would be okay. Mom clapped her hands in delight. Oh, thank you, darling. You won't regret this. The next day, she came to pick up the keys. I'll give them back at the wedding, she said, handing me an ornate invitation. 1 month from today. I can't wait for you to be there. As I watched her drive away, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was happy that Mom wanted me at her wedding. Another part couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. The weeks flew by, and I was busy with work and my own life. But as the wedding approached, I decided to check on the house and make sure everything was in order for Mom's party. As I pulled up to the curb, I noticed unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Frowning, I walked up to the front door and knocked. A stranger answered. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking confused. "I'm here to check on the house," I said. "I'm the owner." The man's frown deepened. "I think there's been a mistake. My wife and I just bought this house. We're in the middle of moving in." My heart dropped. "That's impossible. This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandparents." The man called his wife over, and they explained that they'd bought the house from a woman whose description matched my mother's new look perfectly. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mom had done it again. She'd manipulated me, used me, all to steal my inheritance. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. How could she have sold the house? She didn't have the right, unless she'd forged documents. For a moment, I considered calling the police right then and there. But as the initial shock wore off, a cold anger settled in its place. No, I wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. Mom thought she'd won, that she'd pulled off her scheme without a hitch. She was expecting to celebrate her new marriage, to start her new life flush with the money from my grandparents' house. Well, she had another thing coming. The week leading up to Mom's wedding was a flurry of activity. I reached out to every relative I could think of, aunts, uncles, cousins, and told them everything. The fraudulent sale of the house, the years of neglect, the stolen college fund. To my relief, they were unanimously outraged. I outlined my plan, asking each of them to play along at the wedding, to act as if everything was normal until I gave the signal. They all agreed, eager to see justice served. The day of the wedding arrived. I dressed in a beautiful blue dress, my hair and makeup carefully done. To all outward appearances, I was the picture of a supportive daughter. The ceremony was lavish, clearly sparing no expense. My stomach churned, knowing that this extravagance was likely funded by the sale of my grandparents' home. When it came time for the reception, I waited patiently as guest after guest offered their congratulations. Finally, I approached the microphone, a serene smile plastered on my face. "I'd like to say a few words about my mother," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Then, with deliberate slowness, I reached into my purse and pulled out a white cap. The words "My mother is a thief" blazed across it in bright red letters. I placed it on my head, and around the room, my relatives did the same. The silence was deafening. Mom's face drained of color as I continued. "Let me tell you a story," I said, my voice ringing out in the stunned quiet. A story about a woman who abandoned her child, who stole money meant for that child's education, and who most recently fraudulently sold a house she had no right to sell, a house left to her daughter by loving grandparents. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Mom trying to signal me to stop, but I pressed on, recounting years of neglect and deception. "And now," I concluded, "she stands here celebrating her wedding with money obtained through fraud, money stolen from her own daughter." The young groom, Daniel, turned to Mom, his face a mask of shock and disgust. "Sarah, is this true?" he demanded. Under the weight of dozens of accusing stares, Mom finally broke. "Yes," she wailed. "But I love you, Daniel. I'll do anything for you. Please, please don't leave me." She fell to her knees, clutching at Daniel's legs, mascara streaking down her face. The beautiful bride was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered woman. The wedding reception devolved into utter chaos. Guests were shouting, some in anger, others in disbelief. Amidst the uproar, Mom suddenly sprang to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little rubbish." She screamed at me, her voice raw with fury. I should have aborted you when I had the chance. I wish you'd never been born. Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I stood my ground, watching as years of pent-up resentment and bitterness poured out of her. Daniel, who had been standing in shocked silence, finally found his voice. "That's enough," he said, his tone ice cold. "Sarah, I can't believe I almost married you. You're a monster." With that, he turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Mom standing alone in her white dress, mascara streaking down her face. I took off my cap, the words "my mother is a thief" now seeming almost quaint compared to the ugly truth that had been revealed. With a final deliberate motion, I threw it at her feet. "Goodbye, Mom," I said quietly, then turned and walked away, leaving her screaming and sobbing behind me. The ensuing weeks were filled with a frenzy of court cases. I immediately went to the police and reported Mom's fraud and forgery. With the faked paperwork, the testimony of witnesses, and Mom's own admission of guilt during the wedding, the case seemed strong. Justice was done in the end. Mom received a jail term of several years for her misdeeds. She was forced to reimburse extra damages for her years of deceit, as well as repay the funds from the fictitious property sale. I experienced a strange mixture of emotions as I stood outside the courthouse following the final hearing. Relief that the truth had finally surfaced, sadness for the mother I never truly had, but most of all, I felt free. Free from the burden of unspoken truths and repressed anger that I had carried for so long. I bought a little, comfortable house for myself with the settlement money. It was smaller than my grandparents', but it was all mine. I put the remainder away for later, considering the family I want to have in the future. Life found its new cadence. My work was going great. I was meeting new people, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly content and at ease. Then out of the blue, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello," with caution I replied. "Ashley?" There was a voice, a young man. "It's Jake, your brother." A beat skipped in my heart. Jake and I had not spoken since our childhood. He went on, I heard about what happened with Mom. "I wanted to hear your side of the story, if that's okay." That night, we spoke for hours on end. Since the divorce, Jake had lived with his father, where he was protected from the majority of Mom's pranks. I informed him, and he appeared astonished. But more than anything, he felt sorry that we'd lost so many years together. Jake and I began mending our friendship from that day on. We had coffee together, texted one another, and gradually grew to know one another as adults. We had a lot of missed time to make up for, so it wasn't always simple, but it was well worth it. I can't help but think back on the path that led me here as I sit here and gaze out the window of my new house. The journey wasn't simple. It was full of treachery, pain, and grief, but it also brought me to strength I didn't know I had, long overdue justice, and a brother I had believed I had lost.
The dinner table was set with Mom's finest china, the kind she only brought out for special occasions. The smell of roasted chicken wafted through the air, making my mouth water. It should have been a pleasant family gathering, but the tension was palpable. "Dee, dear, you really should have made more of an effort with your appearance," Mom said, eyeing my casual outfit with disdain. "This is a special night." I forced a smile, ignoring the jab. "It smells delicious, Mom. Thank you for hosting us." Tom squeezed my hand under the table, his way of offering silent support. At least he was on my side, or so I thought. As we started eating, Mom launched into a monologue about the importance of family legacy and carrying on the family name. Her pointed glances in my direction made the subtext clear. My inability to have children was a constant source of disappointment. "Which is why," she continued, "we've been discussing some exciting changes for our family's future." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat and a knot formed in my stomach. This didn't sound good. "You see, Dee," Mom said, her voice sickly sweet, "while we love you dearly, the fact remains that you're unable to provide an heir. A great injustice, really, given how devoted Tom has been. I felt Tom tense beside me, but he remained silent. Anger and hurt bubbled up inside me as Mom's words sank in. So, we've decided to welcome a new addition to the family, a younger, more fertile woman who can give us the grandchildren we so desperately desire. The room spun as I processed her words. A new wife for Tom? How could he betray me like this? You can't be serious, I managed, my voice shaking. Tom, tell her she's out of her mind. But Tom wouldn't meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on his plate. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. He was in on this twisted plan. Don't look so shocked, dear, Mom said, her smile never wavering. This was always the arrangement. You knew your role was temporary. Memories of our early days together flooded my mind. The promises of forever, the dreams we'd shared. All lies, it seemed. How could you do this to me? I asked Tom, fighting back tears. After everything we've been through. He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of guilt and resignation. I'm sorry, Dee, but my mother is right. We need an heir. It's for the good of the family. The betrayal cut deep, a knife twisting in my gut. In that moment, I saw my husband and mother-in-law for who they truly were, manipulative, selfish people who viewed me as disposable. As the shock gave way to anger, I made a decision. I would not go quietly. If they wanted a war, I would give them one they'd never forget. Pushing back from the table, I met Mom's cold stare with newfound resolve. You haven't seen the last of me, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside. This isn't over, not by a long shot. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving my shattered dreams behind. But a new fire burned within me, a determination to fight for what was rightfully mine. They wanted an heir? Well, they were about to get more than they bargained for. A few days after the disastrous dinner, Mom called to invite me over for a casual gathering with some of the community women. I knew it was a trap, but I also saw an opportunity to start fighting back. As I walked into her immaculate living room, I was immediately surrounded by a group of well-dressed, gossiping ladies. Mom beamed at the center of it all, like a spider overseeing her web. Ladies, you all know my dear daughter-in-law, Dee, she announced, gesturing for me to join her. Come, let me properly introduce you. One by one, she paraded me in front of the women, each introduction laced with subtle digs about my age, my childlessness, my perceived inadequacies as a wife. The words stung, but I kept my composure, forcing a polite smile. This is Marjorie, president of the gardening club. Isn't it a shame Dee has never shown an interest in cultivating life? Mom said, with a pointed look. Marjorie gave me a pitying glance before turning away, whispering to her friend. It went on like that for what felt like an eternity, Mom's barbs growing sharper with each new acquaintance. Through it all, Tom lounged in the corner, nursing a drink and pointedly ignoring the spectacle. As the gathering wore on, I noticed a few of the women stealing sympathetic glances my way. Perhaps I had more allies than I realized. During a lull, I found myself beside Judith, an older woman known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue. Don't pay her any mind, dear, she murmured, patting my arm. We all know Lorraine's just bitter because her own daughter abandoned her years ago. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this juicy bit of information. Judith gave me a conspiratorial wink before moving on. Suddenly, the endless parade of introductions took on a new light. These women weren't just Mom's adoring sycophants. They were a wealth of knowledge about her deepest insecurities and darkest secrets. And with a few well-placed allies, I could start turning the tide. As the gathering finally wound down, I made a point of thanking Mom for her hospitality with a pointed smile. She narrowed her eyes, sensing the shift in my demeanor. This isn't over, Dolores, she hissed under her breath. Not by a long shot. Wouldn't have it any other way, I replied coolly, already formulating my next move. On my way out, I caught Tom's eye for the briefest moment. His gaze was hollow, empty, as if he'd already checked out of our marriage long ago. Fine by me. The less he was involved, the easier it would be to dismantle his mother's twisted schemes from the inside out. As I drove away from Mom's house, I felt a newfound sense of determination. She might have won the battle, but the war was just beginning. With a few unexpected allies in my corner, I was ready to fight for my life and make her regret ever crossing me. A few days after the disastrous community gathering, Lorraine ambushed me with another cruel demand. "We need to schedule you for a fertility test," she announced over coffee, not even looking up from her magazine. I nearly choked on my drink. "Excuse me? Why on earth would I do that?" She fixed me with a steely gaze. "To prove once and for all whether you're capable of providing an heir. If the results are positive, perhaps we can revisit this ridiculous notion of bringing in another woman." The audacity of her request stunned me into silence. After everything they'd put me through, they still expected me to jump through hoops? I opened my mouth to protest, but Tom cut me off. "Just do it, Dee," he said flatly. "The sooner we get this settled, the better for everyone." His callous disregard for my feelings felt like a slap in the face. Didn't my husband have any loyalty left? Realizing I was outnumbered, I agreed to the test, if only to buy myself some time. The procedure itself was mercifully quick, but the waiting was agonizing. Each day that ticked by, I imagined Lorraine growing more smug, more convinced that I would fail this latest trial. I couldn't let her win, not this time. Finally, the call came. The doctor's tone was carefully neutral as she relayed the results. I was still fertile, very much capable of conceiving a child. An immense weight lifted from my shoulders, and for a fleeting moment I felt a glimmer of hope that this nightmare might actually end. That hope was swiftly extinguished when I shared the news with Lorraine and Tom. Rather than being pleased, or even relieved, Lorraine's expression remained cold and calculating. "Well, isn't that interesting?" she mused. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. These things have a way of working themselves out in the end." Tom said nothing, his face an inscrutable mask. In that moment, I realized with sickening clarity that the test had never been about giving me a fair chance. To them, I was an inconvenient obstacle to be disposed of, no matter what the results showed. Memories came flooding back of those early days with Tom, when we discussed having children of our own. I remembered the tenderness in his eyes, the excitement in his voice as he painted pictures of our future family. Now, it was as if that man had never existed, replaced by this hollow stranger who valued his mother's whims above all else. As Lorraine droned on about needing to explore other options, I tuned her out, my mind racing. For weeks, I'd been reactionary, constantly scrambling to counter her latest move. But no more. It was time to take control of the situation, to turn the tables on these two manipulators before they could do any more damage. I would play along for now, I decided, lulling them into a false sense of complacency. And then, when they least expected it, I would strike, exposing their deceit and hypocrisy for all to see. This time, I would be the one dictating the terms. Lorraine's voice finally broke through my reverie. "Are you listening, Dolores? We need to start interviewing potential surrogates immediately." I met her gaze, my expression carefully neutral. "Of course, whatever you think is best." The words tasted like acid, but I forced myself to smile. Let them believe they'd won, for now. Soon enough, they would realize they had underestimated me at their peril. This was no longer just a fight for my marriage. It was a battle for my dignity, my self-worth. And I didn't intend to lose. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, a sickening realization washed over me. This entire marriage had been a sham, a twisted game orchestrated by Lorraine, with Tom as her willing pawn. Memories came flooding back of our early days together, when we'd excitedly discussed our hopes and dreams for starting a family. I remembered Tom's tender reassurances that we had all the time in the world, that children would come when the moment was right. "We'll figure it out together, babe," he'd murmured, pulling me close. "No need to rush into anything." Now, in the harsh light of day, those words rang hollow, a carefully constructed lie designed to lure me into Lorraine's trap, because the truth was they'd never intended for me to be a permanent part of this family. The signs had been there all along, but I'd been too blinded by love and optimism to see them. Like the time Tom casually mentioned that his parents expected him to provide them with grandchildren, no matter what, or the way Lorraine had bristled at my reluctance to move into her home after our wedding. "It's just until we get on our feet," she'd said with a saccharine smile. "You don't mind a brief stint under my roof, do you, dear?" That brief stint had turned into years of walking on eggshells, enduring her endless critiques and power plays, all while Tom stood idly by, ceding more and more control to the woman who'd raised him. I should have run then, I realized, escaped before allowing myself to be slowly suffocated by their toxic dynamic. But some foolish part of me had clung to the belief that love could conquer all, that Tom would eventually grow a spine and stand up to his mother's manipulations. As I replayed our heated argument from earlier, any remaining doubts evaporated. Tom's callous admission that I was always meant to be a temporary solution easily discarded once a more suitable option presented itself. It was a brutal awakening, exposing the true depths of his betrayal. White-hot anger surged through me, quickly followed by a wave of icy determination. If they thought I would simply slink away in disgrace, they had vastly underestimated me. I would stay and fight, unleashing a vengeance so exquisite, so utterly devastating, that they would have no choice but to rue the day they dared to cross me. Tom's meek compliance would be his undoing, the rope by which I hanged his pathetic dreams of legacy and inheritance. And Lorraine, that smug, domineering shrew, would find her world crumbling around her, victim to the same twisted machinations she'd so gleefully inflicted on me. A feral grin spread across my face as delicious scenarios began taking shape. This was no longer about salvaging some sliver of dignity. It was about complete and utter obliteration, leaving their selfish ambitions in ashes around them. Let them believe they'd won, I decided. Let them bask in their false sense of victory. Because soon enough, the tables would turn, and I would be the one dictating the terms of our little game. Closing my eyes, I could already envision their stunned, horrified expressions as the truth finally dawned. They wanted an heir to continue their precious legacy? Well, they were about to get far more than they bargained for. In the days that followed, Lorraine's campaign of emotional torture intensified. Everywhere I turned, she was there, chipping away at my self-worth with her snide remarks and undisguised looks of contempt. "Really, Dolores? You're going to wear that?" She'd eyeing my outfit with disdain. So frumpy. No wonder Tom's lost interest. I grit my teeth, determined not to rise to the bait. Losing my composure was exactly what she wanted. At first, Tom stayed out of it, content to let his mother do the heavy lifting when it came to demoralizing me. But soon enough, even he joined the fray, parroting Lorraine's insults about my inability to give him a child, my failure as a wife. "Maybe if you'd put in a bit more effort," he sneered one morning as I headed off to work, my sole refuge from the toxicity at home. Even there, I found no peace. Lorraine's constant demands that I contribute more financially to secure the family's future left me drained at the end of each day. I dutifully wrote a check for $1,000 every month, a sick feeling settling in my gut as I did. So this was my reward for years of loyal service, to be bled dry by the very people who claimed to care for me. The breaking point came when Lorraine announced, with fake sweetness, "The surrogates will be here this weekend for interviews. You'll want to be on your best behavior, Dolores." I could no longer hold my tongue. "Are you kidding me? After everything you've put me through, you expect me to just roll over for this?" Tom's eyes went wide, but Lorraine simply shrugged, unperturbed. "Well, I did give you a chance to do things the proper way, but you've made your choice clear." "My choice?" I sputtered, indignant rage bubbling up inside me. "When did I ever choose any of this? You two cowards dragged me into this nightmare against my will." In that moment, Tom should have spoken up, should have defended me as his wife. Instead, he shrank back, cowed by his mother's withering glare. "That's enough out of you," Lorraine said coolly. "Why don't you run along like a good girl? The adults need to discuss family matters." The derisive dismissal was like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth, fully prepared to unleash the torrent of hurt and anger that had been building up for months. But something stopped me. Suddenly, it all became clear. This was what Lorraine wanted. She thrived on confrontation, on exerting her dominance over me through sheer force of will. Any outburst on my part would only serve to feed her power trip. A strange sense of calm washed over me, and I felt the fight go out of me, at least for the moment. Straightening my shoulders, I met Lorraine's gaze steadily. "You know what?" "You're right," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm just going to step aside and let you two continue making decisions for this family. Seems to be working out so well for you both." Lorraine blinked, clearly thrown by my uncharacteristic acquiescence. But her smugness quickly returned. "Finally, she sees reason. I knew you'd come around eventually, dear." I didn't bother responding, turning on my heel and heading for the door. Let them think they'd beaten me. Let them revel in their hollow victory. Because in that moment, I knew the game had changed. No more reacting, no more falling into their twisted manipulations. From now on, I would be the one dictating the terms, and by the time I was done, they wouldn't know what hit them. I should have seen it coming, really. The signs were all there. Lorraine's increasingly smug demeanor, Tom's guilty silences whenever I tried to discuss our future. But when I walked through the front door that fateful evening, the harsh reality still hit me like a ton of bricks. There, perched on the living room sofa like she owned the place, was a young woman I'd never seen before. Sleek and polished, with an air of self-assurance that could only come from years of being catered to. This was her, I realized with sickening clarity, the usurper they'd handpicked to take my place. "Ah, Dolores, there you are," Lorraine said, rising to greet me with a saccharine smile. "Allow me to introduce Angela. She'll be joining our family shortly." The smug emphasis on those last few words left no doubt as to Angela's intended role. I felt bile rise in my throat as Tom shifted awkwardly beside the interloper, unable to meet my gaze. "You've got to be kidding me," I managed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Tom, please tell me this is some kind of sick joke." For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or the last vestiges of the man I'd fallen in love with. But then Lorraine stepped between us, her expression hardening. "Don't be so dramatic, Dolores. You knew this day was coming." She gestured dismissively in my direction. "She's getting on in years, and her condition makes her unsuitable for carrying on the family name. Isn't that right, dear?" Tom said nothing, his silence hanging heavy in the air. Anger and hurt welled up inside me, quickly segueing into a cold, bitter sense of resignation. After everything, he still couldn't find the courage to stand up for me, for our marriage. "You're despicable, both of you," I spat, glaring at Lorraine and the smirking Angela in turn. "Using people's lives like this, discarding them when they no longer serve your purposes. I don't know what's worse, your cruelty or your cowardice." Lorraine merely shrugged, unperturbed. "Strong words from someone in your precarious position, but I suppose that's to be expected." With a sickening lurch, I realized she was holding something in her hands, a manila envelope, no doubt containing the final insult they had prepared for me. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked warily, but I already knew the answer. "Well, we can't very well have you lingering about once Angela arrives, now can we?" Lorraine replied, her smile taking on a predatory edge. "These are the divorce papers, which will allow you to exit this family with a modicum of dignity intact, though I shudder to think how you'll get by without us." The room started to spin as she extended the envelope toward me. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading, the point of no return, where I would have to decide whether to go down swinging or slink away in disgrace. Part of me wanted to fight, to rage against the injustice of it all. But another, wearier part knew that there was no point in prolonging this toxic charade any further. Lorraine and Tom had made their decision, callously prioritizing their twisted idea of legacy over anything resembling basic human decency. So with a heavy heart and a lump in my throat, I reached out and took the envelope, already feeling the weight of my shattered dreams pressing down on me. "Don't worry, I'll be just fine without you," I said, mustering what little dignity I had left. "In fact, I'd say the world just got a whole lot brighter." Lorraine's mocking laughter followed me out the door, but I didn't care. The papers were signed, the bridge burned, and as I drove away from that wretched house, I made a silent vow to myself. One day soon, they would regret ever underestimating me. For now, though, I needed to lick my wounds and chart a new course, one free from their toxic influence. But mark my words, vengeance would be mine. They wanted to cast me aside like some unwanted burden? Well, they were about to learn just how heavy that burden could become. In the aftermath of my brutal ousting from the family, I found myself adrift, reeling from the depths of Lorraine and Tom's betrayal, yet simultaneously liberated from their toxic grip. With nowhere else to turn, I did the only thing I could. I went home, back to the warm embrace of my parents and the life I'd left behind so many years ago. "That son of a bitch!" My father growled when I recounted the sordid tale, fists clenching with a rare burst of anger. "After everything you sacrificed for that family, Mom simply held me close, her gentle shushing the only balm for the ragged wound in my heart. In their cozy little ranch home, surrounded by decades of cherished memories, I finally felt safe enough to process the devastating turn my life had taken. But even as I grieved my shattered dreams, a newfound sense of determination took root. I was done being a victim, done letting Lorraine and her cronies dictate my worth. It was time to show them and myself what I was truly capable of when freed from their toxic influence. The first step, I decided, was to rebuild my financial security. While Tom and his mother had been content to bleed me dry, I'd been quietly squirreling away funds, investing in a passion project that had become my own little secret. With my parents' support, I threw myself into making that dream a reality. Months passed in a whirlwind of hard work and renewed purpose. Before I knew it, the dilapidated flower shop I'd bought on a whim had been transformed into a thriving business, its rustic charm and premium blooms drawing rave reviews from customers across the city. My own little oasis far removed from the suffocating world of Lorraine's making. Which was why, when the local news crew showed up to do a feel-good segment on the shop's success, I didn't hesitate to seize the opportunity. "Behind every flower there's a story," I said earnestly into the camera, carefully manicured hands caressing a vibrant red rose. A tale of resilience, of blossoming against all odds. That's what this place represents to me. A chance to start anew, to cultivate something truly beautiful out of even the most barren of circumstances. The words rang with authenticity, each one carrying the weight of my own hard-won rebirth. And later, as the segment aired to thousands of viewers across the city, I couldn't help but savor the delicious twist of fate it represented. Because there, I knew Lorraine and Tom would be watching, their own circumstances drastically diminished in the wake of my departure. And as the camera panned over the bustling shop, showcasing my hard-earned success in high definition, they would be forced to confront the harsh truth they'd tried so desperately to deny. I was not the failure they'd sought to discard. I was a woman reborn, thriving precisely because I'd had the courage to shed the shackles they tried to bind me with. And with my newfound power and self-assurance, I had no intention of fading back into meek obscurity. No, this was just the opening salvo, the first taste of the reckoning that was to come. Lorraine and Tom wanted to cast me aside like garbage? Fine. They were about to learn just how hazardous their precious legacy could be when it fell into the wrong hands. The game was just beginning, and this time, I held all the cards. It was the annual neighborhood block party, and the air was thick with the scent of charred burgers and cheap beer. Normally, this was the kind of event I avoided like the plague, too much forced socializing, too many prying eyes. But this year was different. This year, I had a point to prove. As I made my way through the crowd, heads turned and whispers rippled in my wake. News of my very public split from Tom and his venomous mother had spread like wildfire, no doubt fueled by their own twisted version of events. But I didn't care. Let them talk. Soon enough, they would be singing a very different tune. "Well, well, if it isn't the woman of the hour," a familiar voice rang out, dripping with disdain. I turned to find Lorraine bearing down on me, Tom skulking a few paces behind like a beaten dog. Angela was mercifully absent, though I had no illusions about her eventual appearance. "Lorraine," I replied coolly, refusing to be baited. "Lovely to see you out and about. Keeping busy, I trust?" She sneered at my nonchalant tone. "Don't play coy with me, Dolores. We both know you've been putting on quite the performance lately with your newfound success." The way she spat out that last word spoke volumes. To Lorraine, my independence was a personal affront, a threat to the natural order she'd worked so hard to maintain. Tom shifted uncomfortably beside her, his gaze flitting anywhere but my face. I almost felt sorry for the pathetic bastard. "If you're referring to my blossoming business ventures, I don't see how that's any of your concern," I said evenly. "But since you brought it up, things are going swimmingly. I'd offer you a bouquet, but I have a strict policy against fraternizing with snakes." A few nearby partygoers failed to stifle their laughter, emboldening me. Lorraine's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "That by prancing around with your little flower shop, putting on airs for the neighborhood, you've somehow bested me?" I shrugged unconcerned. "I don't think anything, Lorraine. I know I've won. Why else would you be standing here, so clearly threatened by my mere existence? The barb hit its mark, and I could see the fury building behind her cold eyes. Good. Let her rage, let her spiral into the toxic pit of her own making. I was no longer afraid. You arrogant little... she began, but a warm hand on my arm stopped her in her tracks. It was Judith, bless her soul, flanked by a small cluster of the community ladies who'd borne witness to my humiliation all those months ago. "Is there a problem here, Dee?" she asked pointedly, her sharp gaze cutting into Lorraine. Only we couldn't help but overhear this. Unpleasantness. Lorraine visibly bristled at the subtle rebuke, her mouth working furiously as she struggled to regain her composure. In that moment, it was clear. The tides had turned, and she was swiftly becoming the outcast in her own social circle. "No problem at all, Judith," I replied, squeezing her hand gratefully. "Lorraine was just reminiscing about old times. Weren't you, dear?" The sickly sweet endearment hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see Lorraine's hands curling into fists as she fought for control. This time, though, she remained silent, seemingly aware that any outburst would only further alienate her. "Well, isn't that nice?" Judith said, her tone making it abundantly clear that it was anything but. "Why don't you ladies run along, then? I'm sure Dee has much better things to do with her time." It was a blatant dismissal, and an utterly masterful one at that. As the cluster of women closed ranks around me, Lorraine could only gape impotently, her carefully cultivated facade of genteel superiority crumbling by the second. "This isn't over," she managed finally, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You mark my words, Dolores, you haven't seen the last of me." "I certainly hope not," I shot back, feeling emboldened by the support of my newfound allies. "Watching you unravel promises to be immensely satisfying." With that, I turned on my heel, leaving her to stew in her own bitter juices as I rejoined the party. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time, I held the higher ground. Lorraine's twisted legacy was already cracking at the seams, and I had no intention of letting up until it lay in ruins at my feet.